The map in his left hand is worn soft at the edges. He's consulted it so many times the paper has started to feel like cloth. Around him, the Ogaden Plateau stretches flat and merciless under an October sun. And somewhere beyond the horizon, he knows exactly how far, he's measured it. Italian artillery columns are moving. He can't hear them yet, but he knows. He stands very still. White shama draped over one shoulder, leather ammunition bandoliers crossed over a European military jacket beneath. Ancient empire wearing modern war like a second skin. The brass cartridge loops on his Mauser rifle are still full. Every single one. He hasn't fired yet. And here's what's strange about this moment. He is not afraid. He is calculating. Because the man holding that worn map comes from a civilization that has been doing exactly this, standing at the edge of catastrophe, measuring the distance, deciding when to hold and when to move, for 3,000 years. Who is he? And what does he know about his own civilization that makes tanks and poison gas feel like a problem he can outlast? His name is Ras Desta Damtu. He is 36 years old. He is married to Princess Tanagnawurk, daughter of Emperor Haile Selassie, which makes him both family and general, both symbol and soldier. And in October 1935, he commands the entire southern front of Ethiopia's defense against the largest military invasion Africa has seen since Napoleon. Italy has deployed 400,000 troops. They have tanks, they have aircraft, they have mustard gas, a weapon banned by the Geneva Protocol just 9 years earlier in 1926, which Italy signed and is now openly violating. Ras Desta has rifles. Some of them date to the 1890s. And yet, this is not Ethiopia's first time standing at an edge like this. In 1896, at the Battle of Adwa, Ethiopian forces destroyed an entire Italian army in a single afternoon. 7,000 Italian soldiers killed in roughly 6 hours. It remains the largest defeat of a European colonial force by an African army in history. Ras Desta knows that story. He grew up inside it. But here's what that fact about Adwa doesn't tell you. And this is the real question this video is going to answer. Aksum collapses. The central government dissolves for a century. Then a modern European army arrives with chemical weapons. 3 times Ethiopia should have been finished. 3 times it wasn't. So what is actually going on here? Not just survive, but come back stronger each time, while every empire around it collapsed into dust. And that's just the beginning, because the real question is, what exactly did Ethiopia know that Rome, Persia, and the British Empire never figured out? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to trace 3,000 years of Ethiopian survival through 3 specific moments of collapse and 3 specific moments of rebuilding. We'll start with the fall of Aksum, one of the ancient world's great trading empires, and watch it do something no empire in history had done before: deliberately retreat to survive. Then we'll move to the era of princes, a century and a half of internal fragmentation so severe that Ethiopia essentially had no central government, and show you how a civilization held itself together without a state. That one should sit with you for a second, because it means an entire civilization kept functioning while its government had effectively ceased to exist. No capital, no emperor, no center, and yet the thing held. And then we'll close with 1935, Ras Desta's map, Italy's poison gas, and a 5-year occupation that Ethiopia survived by doing something counterintuitive. Something that most empires, in their pride, would never allow themselves to do. By the end, you'll have what I think is history's most underrated resilience formula. Not a motivational poster, an actual operating system. One that 3,000 years of pressure-tested history has refined into something almost elegant. The most surprising thing you'll learn? It has almost nothing to do with military strength, and everything to do with what you're willing to let go of. Let's go back, way back, to roughly 400 BC, in the highlands of what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, where a civilization called the Dumt Kingdom is already old, already writing, already trading with South Arabia across the Red Sea. This is the root system. What grows from it by the 1st century AD is Aksum. And Aksum is extraordinary in ways that history textbooks consistently undersell. By 100 AD, the Aksumite Empire is one of 4 great powers in the world. The Roman historian Mani lists them: Rome, Persia, China, and Aksum. 4. Not 5, not 6. 4. That's the company Ethiopia was keeping 2,000 years ago. Aksum controls the Red Sea trade routes at their most strategic point, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow throat between Africa and Arabia through which silk, spices, ivory, and gold must pass. Aksumite gold coins are turning up in markets from India to the Mediterranean. When your money travels that far, you are not a regional power. You are a player. In 330 AD, Emperor Ezana converts to Christianity, not because missionaries forced him, but because it's a trade advantage. The Byzantine Empire is Christian. Christian kingdoms get preferential trade terms. Ezana reads the room, makes the call, and overnight, Ethiopia becomes one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. A calculated move that will define Ethiopian identity for the next 17 centuries. At its peak, Aksum controls territory across modern Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Yemen, and parts of Saudi Arabia. The obelisks they carve, some over 30 meters tall, are engineering achievements that still stand in Aksum today. One of them, stolen by Mussolini in 1937, sat in Rome until 2008 when Italy finally returned it. We'll come back to Mussolini. But here's where the story turns. By the 7th century AD, something is going wrong. Not all at once. Empires never collapse all at once. Slowly, the way a house settles before it falls. The Islamic expansion of the 630s and 640s reshapes the entire Red Sea trading world. Aksum's commercial partners, the Byzantine and Persian empires, are either collapsing or contracting. The trade routes that made Aksum rich are shifting. New powers control the sea lanes. And then, critically, the climate changes. Soil exhaustion from centuries of agriculture, deforestation, droughts. By 700 AD, Aksum can no longer feed its own population at the scale it once could. And here's where Ethiopia does something no other great empire of the ancient world managed to do. It chooses to shrink. Not surrender, not collapse. Shrink, deliberately, strategically, pulling its center of gravity away from the coast and up into the highlands. The Simien Mountains, the Amhara Plateau. Terrain so rugged, so vertical, so difficult to move an army through that geography itself becomes the empire's defensive wall. Aksum stops being a maritime empire and becomes something different. A highland kingdom, smaller, harder, more concentrated. It trades breadth for depth. Every other great empire of the ancient world, Rome, Han China, the Maurya Empire, responded to contraction with desperate expansion. More territory, more taxation, more military overextension, faster collapse. Aksum did the opposite. It gave up the coast. It gave up the trade routes. It kept the highlands, the language, the written script, Ge'ez, one of the oldest written languages still in liturgical use today, and the church. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church becomes the spine of national identity, the institution that survives when everything political dissolves. By 900 AD, Aksum as a political entity is essentially gone. But Ethiopia, the idea of Ethiopia, the cultural memory, the religious continuity, the written records, is intact, compressed, waiting. This is the first rebuild, and it raises a question that won't be answered for another 1,000 years. What happens when even that compressed identity starts to fracture? Fast forward to 1769. Ethiopia has a king. His name is Eos II, and he controls almost nothing. Because for the past 52 years, since 1769 is actually the tail end of a period that begins in 1769 and stretches back to 1769, let me be precise, the Zemene Mesafint, the era of princes, begins formally in 1769 and runs until 1855. 86 years. 86 years during which Ethiopia has an emperor on the throne in Gondar who is, functionally, a puppet, a symbol. The real power belongs to regional warlords called Ras, nobles who fight each other constantly, shift alliances seasonally, and treat the imperial throne as a prop in their own power struggles. In those 86 years, Ethiopia has over a dozen different emperors. Some reign for months. One reigns for a matter of weeks before being deposed and replaced. We're not talking about a weakened central government. There is no central government. The emperor exists mostly as a ceremonial figure, while regional lords run everything and answer to no one. By any conventional measure of political science, Ethiopia during the Zemene Mesafint is a failed state. And yet, something survives. The Ge'ez script keeps being copied in monasteries. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church keeps performing its liturgy, keeping its calendar. The Ethiopian calendar, which differs from the Gregorian by 7 years and 8 months, which is why Ethiopia celebrated the year 2000 in September 2007. The oral traditions keep being transmitted. The highland geography keeps being inhabited by people who identify, specifically and fiercely, as Ethiopian, not as subjects of whichever warlord currently controls Gondar. Ethiopian. This is the midpoint of this story, and it's time to return to the question we opened with. That man on the Ogaden Plateau, Ras Desta, standing still with his worn map and his full cartridge loops. Why isn't he afraid? The answer begins here, in the Zemene Mesafint. Because Ethiopia had already learned, over those 86 years of political chaos, that the state and the civilization are not the same thing. You can lose the state, completely, and still preserve what matters. But here's where it deepens. In 1855, a man named Kasa Haile, born poor, the son of a minor chieftain, raised partly by monks, defeats every regional warlord one by one, crowns himself Emperor Tewodros II, and begins the reunification of Ethiopia. He is brilliant, ruthless, and ultimately tragic. He modernizes the army. He tries to build roads. He attempts to create a centralized bureaucracy where there has been none for nearly a century. He writes letters to Queen Victoria asking for military assistance against Egypt and receives no reply. In 1868, surrounded by a British military expedition sent to rescue European hostages he'd taken in frustration, Tewodros II shoots himself with a pistol rather than be captured. The pistol had been a gift from Queen Victoria. She sent the gun, but not the alliance. But what Tewodros started, his successors complete. Emperor Johannes IV. Then Emperor Menelik II, who in 1896, at the Battle of Adwa, assembles 100,000 Ethiopian soldiers, including cavalry, infantry, and artillery captured from previous Italian incursions, and destroys an Italian force of 17,500 men in a single engagement. The Italian commander, General Oreste Baratieri, had boasted he would bring Menelik back to Rome in a cage. Baratieri fled the battlefield. 7,000 Italians died. 3,000 more were captured. It is, by casualty ratio and strategic outcome, one of the most decisive military defeats in colonial history. The Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed in October 1896, forces Italy to recognize Ethiopian sovereignty absolutely. Ethiopia is the only African nation to emerge from the scramble for Africa, that period between 1881 and 1914, when European powers carved up the entire continent, with its independence formally recognized by a European power in a signed treaty. Every other African nation, every single one, is colonized. So how does Italy end up back in Ethiopia in 1935? And how does that story end? Benito Mussolini needs a war. By 1934, his fascist government has been in power for 12 years, and the Italian economy is struggling. He needs a victory. He needs an empire. And he has not forgotten Adwa. Italy remembers Adwa the way a person remembers a humiliation, obsessively, privately, with a specific desire to reverse it. On October 3, 1935, Italian forces crossed the Ethiopian border from Eritrea and Somalia. They use mustard gas dropped from aircraft, 300 tons of it over the course of the campaign. They bomb Red Cross hospitals. They target civilian populations. The League of Nations condemns Italy, imposes sanctions, and then, critically, exempts oil from those sanctions. Without oil, Italy's mechanized invasion stops. With it, the invasion continues. The League of Nations sanctions are the diplomatic equivalent of confiscating someone's knife while handing them a gun. By May 1936, Addis Ababa falls. Haile Selassie goes into exile in Bath, England, where he gives his famous speech to the League of Nations. It is us today. It will be you tomorrow. Nobody listens. But here is what Italy cannot do, despite controlling the capital, despite having 500,000 troops on Ethiopian soil, despite 5 years of occupation. It cannot make Ethiopians stop being Ethiopian. From the moment the Italians arrive, resistance fighters are already moving in the highlands. They call themselves the Arbegnach, the Patriots. They are never fully suppressed, not for a single year of the occupation. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church refuses to submit to Italian ecclesiastical authority. The Ge'ez manuscripts keep being hidden, copied, preserved. Children keep being taught Ethiopian history by parents who were taught it by their parents. In 1941, 5 years after the fall of Addis Ababa, British and Commonwealth forces, fighting alongside Ethiopian Patriot forces, defeat the Italian army. On May 5, 1941, exactly 5 years to the day after Italian troops entered Addis Ababa, Haile Selassie re-enters his capital. The occupation is over. Ethiopia is the only African nation to liberate itself. With assistance, yes, but through continuous armed resistance from a European occupation during World War II. Ras Desta Damteo, the man on the Ogaden Plateau with the worn map and the full cartridge loops. He died in February 1937, captured by Italian forces and executed. He was 37 years old. He did not live to see the liberation. But the resistance he helped sustain did. Now, here's where this stops being ancient history. In 2023, the Fund for Peace's Fragile States Index ranked 179 countries by political stability. 12 of the 15 most fragile states in the world are nations whose colonial-era borders were drawn by European powers in the 1880s with no regard for existing cultural, ethnic, or linguistic boundaries. 12 of 15. The colonial map, the one that ignored existing civilizations and drew straight lines through them, is still producing instability 140 years later. Ethiopia today is not without its own serious fractures. The Tigray conflict from 2020 to 2022 killed an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people. The country is under real stress, but it is still there, still negotiating its own identity. Still the only nation in sub-Saharan Africa with a continuous written literary tradition stretching back over 2,000 years. From ashes to insights, the pattern is not comfortable. It doesn't resolve neatly. It just keeps going. And that, I think, is the most unsettling thing about it. Because the question it raises for any civilization, including the ones we currently live inside, is not, are we strong enough to dominate? It's, are we coherent enough to survive our own collapse? Ras Desta stood on the Ogaden Plateau with a worn map and full cartridge loops, calculating. Not because he thought he would definitely win, but because 3,000 years of Ethiopian memory had taught him that survival is not a single battle. It comes down to a decision, made over and over across 3,000 years. Know what you can afford to lose. Know what you will not give up under any circumstances. And hold that line, even when the state is gone, the capital is rubble, and the emperor is in exile. The empires that lasted forever were not the ones that never fell. They were the ones that knew, in the moment of falling, exactly what to carry down with them into the dark. Ethiopia survived by retreating to its highlands. Ethiopia had the highlands, a place to fall back to, regroup, and survive. Not every civilization gets that. So what happens when the same pressure hits somewhere flat, nowhere to hide, no natural walls, and the empire still has to find a way through? The next video looks at a civilization that had none of Ethiopia's geographic advantages, faced an even more total destruction, and still rebuilt. And the method it used is so counterintuitive that historians still argue about whether it was genius or accident. That one is coming next. Learn from the past to shape the future, and I'll see you there.